You're listening to the InFocus Interview Show, brought to you by Photofocus.com, an online publication filled with education and inspiration for visual storytellers. This episode is made possible by our partners, ThinkTapLearn.com and Skylum, creators of Luminar. Now here's your host, Vanelli.
Hello and welcome, I'm Vanelli. In this InFocus episode, I had a chance to meet up with photojournalist, educator, and author Rick Friedman. Rick is going to talk about his recent travels overseas and what lenses he used for each of these assignments. Now, before we begin, let's take a moment and thank our partners.
ThinkTapLearn.com. ThinkTapLearn.com is an online resource for creative education from top experts teaching real-world learning. Unleash your creativity at ThinkTapLearn.com. Skylum, creators of Luminar. Luminar is the innovative photo editor you need to make perfect photos in less time, now with the speed and performance you deserve to create incredible photos much faster. Luminar, producing great photography differently.
Here's Rick Friedman. Hey, welcome, Rick.
Hey, V, it's great to be here with you down in Florida.
You're coming from the up north, right?
It was a tad chillier than this up in beautiful Boston, but it's nice to be down here in Florida.
Great. All right, now, so our topic is going to be about lenses, and you just came back from a trip from Africa and the Middle East.
That's correct, yes.
Right. Now, okay, what was the assignment?
Well, we went to Africa, where we were doing a story on a big cat rescue reserve. So these are these magnificent creatures that have lived in horrible conditions, some of them in private zoos, some of them, well, they rescued several cats from Aleppo during the bombing. These are full-grown cats, and they now live in these big pens where they're basically free, but they've never lived in the wild, so they can't live in the wild. But the folks at Lions Rock, that's where we were, which is part of Four Paws International, which is the animal rescue organization, does an amazing job. So we had the honor of going over there to do a story on it, to document what goes on.
All right, so with that in mind, what did you have in your bags? What was your lenses that you chose to bring with you?
Sure. For lenses, well, probably the lens I use the most is a Tamron 100 to 400, which is a terrific range. And it's a fairly lightweight lens, so on a long day out in the bush, you're not exhausted from carrying your gear. The other lens that I used a lot was a Tamron 24 to 70 2A, which is a terrific hunk of glass. And those two were really the major lenses that I worked with. I did bring a 1.4 extender with me, although I never really used it. I just had it in case I needed it. And then, of course, I had some filters with me. The primary filter I'm going to use, especially on the wide-angle shots, is a circular polarizer. It's going to pull in those beautiful African skies.
Oh, wow. All right, now, did traveling have anything to do with you having your lens choice? You know, because a lot of times when you travel overseas, you have to be very careful on what you bring because of weight constrictions.
Yeah, depending on the airline you're on, will depend tremendously on what you can carry into the cabin of the aircraft and what you can check. And they're very strict, and sometimes the only answer, if you need your gear, then you're just going to have to pay another couple $100 in excess baggage charges.
So that's why when you were mentioning the 1 to 400, it's lightweight?
Very lightweight, yeah. It's actually, you know, I also brought a 70 to 200 2.8 Tamron with me, which is an outrageously sharp lens. And I use that, but those two lenses, the 100 to 400 and the 70 to 200, are comparable in size and weight. The 70 to 200 is internal focusing. The 100 to 400 is external focusing. So obviously, as you're cranking the lens out going towards 400, the lens is going to physically get longer. But one of the things that they've done on this series of lenses that I really like, which some of the other lens companies aren't doing, is when you have the lens all the way in, you can lock it in position. You know, I always find the problem with a lot of lenses that focus externally, you want to make sure that you're not going to hit that extended lens on anything. So by locking it in when you're walking around, it's just a simple switch on the barrel. After a while, you don't even notice it's there.
Wow. All right, so that 1 to 400 Tamron lens, what's the f-stop range in that?
That is 4.5 to 6. So it's obviously not the fastest lens, but I'm out in the African bush using this. And I got plenty of light. And I'll tell you, I've also been using this lens on some news assignments. A couple of weeks ago, I live in Boston, as I said, and we had a Patriots parade. Yes, we had another parade through the city. Sorry to all you folks that don't have teams that give you parades, but we get to go cover a lot of them. And, I go down there, and fortunately, the best place to photograph this is literally 3 blocks from my studio. Remember, I think some of the TV trucks are parked further away than I am. So I just grabbed my 2 camera bodies, 2470 on one with a polarizer, the 100 to 400, and a ladder. And I just walked the 3 blocks. And it's interesting, I used to, for years, I covered these events with a 70 to 200, which worked great. But when you've got that extra length right there to go from the 200 to 400, you start to see the images in a different way. There's a different feel. You're pulling in tighter, but you're not carrying a ton of gear. I mean, I have a couple of other big lenses, and I am not going to drag a 300 2.8 or something bigger down to this parade where you might be getting jostled, or you're standing on a ladder, or you're trying to squeeze in onto a press riser. And fortunately, people up that way are pretty nice, and we all sort of squeeze in and twist sideways so we can get in around the TV cameras, and we all work together. But you've got these huge lenses on monopods. You're taking up that much more space, and you can't move. So I'm finding this 100 to 400 is a terrific lens for both of these kinds of work. The wild animals, after we did the story on the Big Cat Rescue Reserve at Lions Rock, we went to a place called Mala Mala, which is just off of Kruger National Park, and went out into the bush and shot for 6 days animals in the wild. And again, it was the lens to use.
Wow. Wait, now you mentioned it was a slower lens, and a lot of our listeners, you hear that quite a bit. It's a slower lens. It's not that the lens is slow. What do you mean by a slower lens?
So we're talking about the maximum aperture. How much can you open the lens? So in this case, it's a 4.5. Some of the really big expensive lenses from the camera manufacturers, they may be straight f4s. So at that point, it's only giving you a half a stop. But when you get to the other end, at 400 millimeters, you've gone from f4 to f6. So, you've lost a stop and a third. Again, if I'm using it outside in the middle of the day, it makes no difference. The other thing also is our new cameras. So I shoot Nikon 850s. And that camera is such a terrific camera that it makes no difference if I'm shooting it at ISO 200 or ISO 400 or even up to 800. It's just the new top-of-the-line cameras can handle all of this.
Great. So, and when they say slow, what they're really saying is it means your shutter speeds may not be as fast because you're at an f-stop, f6. So let's say if you needed, let's say for sports, for example, that wouldn't be the lens of choice for nighttime sports.
No, not for nighttime sports, but something else. Again, go back and I wouldn't change my shutter speed if I needed a certain shutter speed to stop the lion that's running, hopefully not directly at me. I'm going to boost my ISO. I'm going to keep my shutter speed because when I hit that shutter, I want to freeze that motion. So I'm willing to bring my ISO up. And again, ISO on these cameras are so good. Do a little bit of noise reduction in your post-processing, and you're going to be amazed how great it looks.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to make sure everyone understood. When we talk about slower lenses, we're not saying that you can't use a higher shutter speed. It just means that you have to up your ISO to get to those shutter speeds.
Like I said, I don't think that little bit of difference in the f-stop is going to make enough difference. If you go to Another one of the totally fast lenses is, again, what is the advantage? I'd rather have this lighter lens that I can move through a crowd. I'm not worried about a monopod. You know, when we were out shooting animals, and I'm shooting off of one side of the Land Rover, and I turn around, and there are elephants charging on the other side. I don't want to be slinging this big piece of glass around. This compact lens in my hand is terrific for this kind of work.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. Now, of course, everyone talks about bokeh. So at 2.8, you get a beautiful shallow depth of field. You get this beautiful bokeh behind the subject. What a lot of people don't realize is if you're shooting that 1 to 400, when you're fully extended to that 400, f6 still has a beautiful bokeh around it because you're extending it. Now, if you had it at 100, then that's totally different. You're not going to get the same bokeh as you would at the distance of 400.
And I'll tell you, you know, on those times when I'm really after that look and I want the bokeh, I have a Tamron 85-1.8. That is just unbelievable lens for that effect. It is just a terrific portrait lens. It's just so sharp and so crisp.
Well, I do. In the old days, do you remember everyone always would say, you know, stick to your manufacturer's lens. And that's true. They make very high quality lenses. The cost is extremely higher than if you were to purchase, let's say, a Tamron lens. Mm-hmm. Now, I photographed lacrosse with that new Tamron 70-200. I was extremely amazed.
Amazing lens.
Now, the only difference, because for us Nikon people, we're used to having the zoom closer to the camera. With Tamron and Canon lenses, they have them further out.
Yeah.
That was just something I had to get used to.
I was going to say, it's just a matter of getting used to it. You know, it's like every time we go buy a new camera, which I do, whenever they come out with a new camera, I need whatever is the latest because it's slightly better than the previous one, and I always want to make sure I give my clients the maximum quality I can give them. So I'm always upgrading cameras, and you know, if you work the way that we work, you can't buy one camera. You got to buy two at a time. You know, so, you know, Nikon, every time Nikon comes out with a new camera, I'm at my friendly camera store going, I'll take two of those. And then I'm thinking, you should see my desk. We got piles of older cameras. But, you know, every time they come out with a new camera, there is something different. You have to learn the menus. So, I mean, new glass, it's a similar thing. You know, you want to, when you acquire any new equipment, you're going to shoot it a tremendous amount on your own, practicing before you take it to a job. As a matter of fact, we actually refer to our studio up in Boston as the photographic test kitchen, because that's where we're testing all of our gear.
And you brought out a good point. People will say, oh, if you want to become a better photographer, buy new gear. And that's not necessarily true.
I agree with that.
But it kind of is, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. It's not true that new gear is going to make you a better photographer. What happens is you buy new gear, and it can be the cheapest piece of glass, it can be the cheapest camera, whatever it is, you're excited about it. Now you go out shooting. So the byproduct is you're getting better because you're excited with a new piece of equipment. It's not the equipment itself, it's the fact that you're excited. You know, do the same thing with your older gear.
Yeah, you know, I get excited by light. I don't need a new piece of equipment to get excited to go out and make pictures. You know.
Okay. Let's talk about light, because that's your expertise as a portrait photographer. Now, I know there's no such thing as this is the only lens to use, but what is your usual go-to lens for portrait photography?
Oh, you know, I have a whole number of my usual go-to lenses depending on the look I'm after. You know, I love that 85-1.8. There are times, quite often, where I'll be in a portrait. It's usually a studio situation, but not always. It may be location, because, you know, I do tons of location work. There is a look of shooting a portrait with a 90 macro. The flat field, it's, you know, and then there are times I want to shoot my portraits with a 200 or even a 400. It's going to flatten the image out a little bit, you know. I always say, you know, there's no one answer, and there's no right or wrong. It is what is the effect you're after, what is the look you're after, and which piece of equipment accomplishes it. So that's I don't have that answer. Shoot a lot of portraits with that 70 to 200 2.8. But again, there are other times at that 90 or the 85, and go in the other direction. Where generally everybody says you're going to do portraits. Well, you want to be 85 to 135. That's, and I'll agree with that. I go 85 to all the way up to a 200 or 400. However, there are times when I'm doing a portrait and I want to accentuate something within the shot. And maybe I'm going to go to my 35 Tamron 1.4, okay? And I'm going to put my subject, nearer to the camera, but the negative space behind tells more of the story. Where sometimes I'll do it the other way, where I live in Boston, of course, so we shoot a lot of academics. And also it's presidential campaign season, so we're up in New Hampshire a lot, and I'll be using it there. I was doing a shoot the other day before I came down here to Florida. I've been down here teaching location lighting workshops across the state. But right before I left, I was covering Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who's just starting to run for president. And she goes into a clothing store. And the picture that I probably like the most is she's literally looking through the rack and looking at clothes, and rather than come in tight on her, I went partway around the rack and kind of using by the screen on the back of the camera, lifted my camera up and did a 35 millimeter shot. So the curvature of the clothes rack and the hangers pulls you into the senator, who is now taken a piece of clothing off the rack and is looking at it, and the lines of the clothes rack draw you in. So there's a case where a 35 millimeter lens for this kind of work is the answer. So it's that portrait where I want a bokeh. That's one kind. It's that portrait where I want to see a little bit of the background out of focus. What is the feel I'm after? And that affects the lens choice. So there are lots of right answers, or there is no right answer, one or the other.
Now, it's funny you're saying the Tamron 35, that's a 1.8?
1.4.
That is 1.4.
1.4,
okay,
yeah.
So the
wide open.
Lens,
it is awesome.
Yeah. I used that with our good buddy Ray Nason.
Oh,
so
terrific!
Because of his
terrific
mustache,
photographer.
Because of his mustache, his beard, and just the facial expressions he has. We were at I forgot what convention it was, and I saw him and I looked and said, Ray, I gotta take. We were doing sport portraits, and I said, Ray, I gotta take your picture. I put Ray with a camera in his hand, and he gets that.
It's a terrific picture. I know the picture. Terrific picture.
But I don't think that picture would have been as iconic or as monumentous if I shot it with 85. Because Ray, in my eyes, is bigger than life. Phenomenal photographer.
His technical whiz.
Oh, yes. His knowledge base is phenomenal.
Yeah. This is always an exchange of ideas and information. Even when I'm teaching a lighting workshop, which I'm going to come down, throw this in right here. I'm going to be down in Fort Lauderdale, March 23rd and 24th, doing a 2-day hands-on location lighting workshop with Photo Workshops Miami.
Oh, that's great. Now, where can we get more information on that?
So if you go to photoworkshopsmiami.com, you can sign up there. It's first day is going to be in the studio. We've rented a terrific studio. We've got a couple of fantastic models. And then the second day, we're going to go do it on the beach. And a lot of that is going to be, how do you overpower the Florida sun? How do you deal with, that bright sun? And it's not just here. If I have to do a portrait of a professor in July at Harvard, and the guy says, well, I'm available at 12:30. It's like, great, pretty light. Still up to us to get in there and make the great portrait. And so, how do we control that light? We use scrims, we use reflectors. We do a lot of filling in. I use Dynalite Baja 400s and 600s, which are just completely self-contained strobes. 400 watt seconds, take it out of the case, throw it on a light stand, turn on the transmitter, You can high-speed sync the transmitter, which is probably another discussion to get into on high-speed sync. But anyway, we're going to be doing all this.
Oh, that's going to be incredible.
And I get to come back.
Yeah, what date is that again?
That is March 23rd and 24th, and it's Photo Workshops Miami. Or people can always reach out to me at rick@rickfriedman.com.
That sounds great. Hey, didn't you also go to Dubai?
Yes, so we flew into Dubai and then went to Sharjah, which is the next emirate over, and went to what is really my favorite photo event of any event I've ever been to around the world, which is the Exposure International Photography Festival. They bring in about 35 top photographers from around the globe to lecture and lead workshops and do presentations, and people have these tremendous photo galleries that is just the most incredible job of printing I have ever seen. I mean, I've never seen my work that big and printed that beautifully. So it is a truly great event. I know it's a bit far away for most of us to get there, but if there's any way you can get there, it's usually in November, and it's a 4-day event, and it's just a wonderful place to visit. And then after the event, I took 4 or 5 days and went to Abu Dhabi and went way out into the desert to photograph the dunes, which are just beyond belief to see, and photograph the camels, and just all in all a great trip.
So what lens choices did you have for that trip?
For that trip, it was actually very similar to the previous trip. So all the long lens stuff on that was shot with the Tamron 100 to 400. And the rest of it was shot with the 24-70. Those are really the two main lenses. You know, I'm bringing polarizing filters for them. And it's just absolutely surreal to be out there.
So Rick, where can we learn more about you?
Well, you can go to my website, rickfriedman.com, rickfriedman.com. We also post quite a bit on social media. So if you go to Facebook, just look for Rick Friedman. And on Instagram and Twitter, it's Rick Friedman, PIX.
Well, that's great. Hey, Rick, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You are listening to the InFocus Interview Show. If you like these interviews, be sure to subscribe to our weekly Photofocus podcast on photofocus.com. Thank you for joining us.